If you've ever been watching a movie and during that movie a character pulled out a Glock and while he did so the sound of a hammer cocking went off, hit that subscribe button. If, when that happened, you tried to explain to your friends that a Glock is striker fired and it doesn't have a hammer and they didn't care, subscribe, comment what movie it was. Or if you don't have any friends but you yelled at your TV alone, we'll just pretend that I'm your friend so you can go ahead and comment. People have been asking me what ammunition I shoot. Freedom Munitions. I've been shooting them for a long time. Now they're actually supporting me and they're also giving you guys a discount. Pretty cool, right? So they're hooking us up. Good on them. The discount code is Garand. So again, they're allowing me to do more testing because it's increasing the amount of ammo I can shoot per month, which is always awesome. A lot has changed since I made my last video on the MK18 Mod 1 and my setup for it. So we get a lot of questions because if you follow my Instagram, you know I've changed it quite a bit, and we're just going to go ahead and nip all those questions in the bud right off the bat and explain kind of what I've changed with the MK18 Mod 1 and why I set it up, why you might set yours up similarly, a little differently. I've had the opportunity over the last year or so to work with a lot of really great guys. Worked with Bear Solutions, CAGWorks, Lucas of T-Rex Arms, and I feel like I've matured a lot as a shooter, plus a lot of rounds, a shit ton of rounds, should I say. So my setup has changed a lot, and we're going to kind of talk about it. Now, realize that this setup is particular to me, so everyone's going to be a little bit different. So don't think that you have to set up your rifle just like me, because again, everybody's a little bit differently. If you're built like a battle gnome, you know, tiny little short squat dude, you're going to set your rifle up differently than I am because I'm built more like Gumby. So again, kind of figure out what's going to work for you, but this is going to kind of work as just kind of a primer for you guys. So anyhow, we have the MK18 Mod 1. Now this rifle is a factory short-barreled rifle from Daniel Defense. Now, of course, I have changed some things, obviously. So we're going to go ahead and talk about what's changed. Now, what hasn't changed is we have the upper, lower, barrel, gas block, rail, pistol grip. Most of the internals, some have changed, but we'll talk about why I did that. Anyhow, let's kind of get into it. So first off, a short-barreled rifle is vicious on parts. It eats them up. There's a lot of gas pressure going along when you fire a short-barreled rifle, and it tends to beat the components up pretty bad. So one of the first things that I did when I got my MK18 Mod 1 was I needed to make sure that we somehow regulated how quickly that bolt carrier group was cycling in the weapon, how quickly it beat itself up. Because I do want this thing to last for a while. You know, I don't want to just throw away $1,700. So you have kind of two options here. You can either change the gas block, you can do an adjustable gas block. You can change the barrel. Now I have heard that Daniel Defense now has barrels with smaller gas ports, so that way you don't have as much gas come back in the system and it cycles a little bit slower. But in my case, I have the giant open gas port that's just blown out, so it's just shooting gas back. So anyhow, we need to figure something out. Now another thing you can do is you can deal with the buffer system. So in my case, I dealt with the buffer system. I didn't want to screw too much with the gas block. I think they did a good job with that. So one thing that I changed was I added the Volter A5 system. Essentially what it is it's a rifle length buffer system, more spring, kind of not so much a heavier buffer weight, but that longer spring allows more travel and allows that bolt carrier group to slow down. So basically it just helps moderate that, ensure that the weapon doesn't beat itself up sooner than it would with, say, like an H1 buffer or an some type of carbine buffer. Anyhow, now on top of the Volter A5, I am running the B5 Systems SOP-Mod stock. I've run a lot of stocks in my time, and I kind of switch between two. I don't have like a favorite, but I typically favor the B5 SOP-Mod. There are SOP-Mod stock that doesn't have the battery compartments. I think it's like the Enhanced, or this is the Enhanced, something like that. Point is, I like the B5 stocks, and I also like the stocks from Bravo Company, specifically their gunfighter stocks, both the Mod 0 and Mod 1. I think the Mod 1 has a cheek kind of similar to the SOP-Mod. So anyhow, those are all good stocks. Right now, currently, I'm running this on it because I like the cheek purchase. Allows me to get a really good cheek weld, be more consistent with my shots. So moving up from there, I do have a QD plate on the back of my receiver. That came, I got that installed. I don't use it so much anymore, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Sling setup in a second. Moving up from that, I have changed the charging handle. I use the BCM gunfighter charging handle. Gunfighter. Most of you are in gunfighting, let's be honest here. Neither am I with this rifle. So the reason I use the gunfighter charging handle is I like the latch. I think it's a strong mechanism. There are other good ones out there. I also use the Gh3. It's like the super dynamic something charging handle. It rocks as well. Just figure out what works for you. I use both interchangeably. I don't have a favorite. Again, different strokes for different folks. Moving down from there, pistol grip. So a lot of people don't like the Daniel Defense pistol grip. They're like, oh, it's ugly. It looks stupid. It's kind of grown on me over time. It's so ugly it looks good at this point. I haven't changed it because it works for me. I really like the grip angle. So if you're going to choose a grip angle for your AR, I prefer something that's a little bit more straight and not so angled like the old A2 grips. Insert a little picture there. The reason for that is when you're shooting squared off against a target, it's a lot more comfortable to have your grip a little bit more neutral. It just helps you keep on target better, all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, I use a lot of different other grips. I also like the Bravo Company grips, the Magpul grips, the B5 grips. Again, there's a lot out there. Just figure out what's going to work for you. Okay, moving up from the grip, we have our trigger. If you'll notice, I have a flat face trigger. Again, I like to be pretty forthright with you guys. The trigger was provided to me by Gh3. So if you don't know, I'm that Gh3 boy now. They support me in a lot of ways. But anyhow, they sent me the Super Dynamic Combat trigger. If you don't know, I've always been a fan of Gh3 triggers, not because they just gave me things. There's a lot of good triggers out there. I do prefer Gh3. They're combat tested, combat proven. A lot of the triggers are used by SOCOM, blah, blah, blah. Point is they work. As far as using a flat face trigger versus a curved trigger, it doesn't really matter to me that much. I have no preference when it comes to that. I don't really notice the difference when I'm shooting fast or shooting long distance. But one thing that I do prefer is a two-stage trigger. I like for long range shots to be able to put tension on that trigger before I release that shot. So anyhow, two-stage triggers are my preference. Everybody's a little bit different. Figure out what works for you. I know Lucas uses a one-stage trigger and he's a much better shooter than me. So take that for what it's worth. Also, there's much better shooters than me. Excuse me, there's much worse shooters than me that also use single-stage triggers. So take that, Lucas. Moving up from there, bolt catch, standard. There is a really good bolt catch from Gh3 and also from Wayne the Gun. The Gh3 bolt catch extends backwards a little bit towards the shooter's trigger finger. That way, if you're having to release the bolt catch with your left hand or if you're left-handed or whatever, it's going to be easier to reach. The Proctor bolt catch moves forward a little bit, so when you insert the magazine, it's easier to release it with your thumb. I think those are both really good designs, but I just prefer the standard one, but both are really good. Everyone keeps asking me about my magazines and why, well, two things, why I use metal mags and why I have a cutoff Magpul on it. So let's talk about both. Magazines, I really don't care. I found that the metal mags work really well. I found that Magpuls work really well. Lancers work really well. I'm going to have a video coming out pretty soon comparing all the different magazines, but I just kind of tend to default to the metals because I like the way they look and they're cool. As far as brands, there's a lot of different brands out there. I prefer the OK Industries. They work pretty good. They're okay. God, that was bad. Magpul followers, always Magpul followers on these. One thing to note, so with Magpul, why did I cut off a loop? So I don't really need the loops on the Magpuls from Magpul. So what it does for me is it provides for me grip, just kind of controllability. So when I'm pulling it out of the pouch, something like that, it just, that rubber surface just gives me grip. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can use rubber grip tape, whatever. But I had a bunch of Magpuls on hand, so I cut them all off, and I used that, and it works perfectly fine. Try it out. If you don't like it, don't use it. But for me, works very well. Up top here, always have a forward assist. You need a forward assist because charging handle can't do it for you. Dust cover, standard metal dust cover. I know Daniel Defense does like a polymer dust cover now. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but let's get a dust cover. You need a dust cover, so something like that. Okay, sighting system. So let's talk about this because everyone wants to know why I do a lot of things. So first off, backup sights, yes, I use them. How important are they? I don't think so important anymore, but we'll talk more about that later, especially why I have a fixed front sight. But anyhow, rear, I just have a CAC. That didn't work. I have the CAC 300 meter front sight. I also think it might be an EOTech. I don't know, something like that. Point is, it works. Use it in the military. used in militaries. So simple. I'm sure there are better ones out there like the Magpul Pros, but that's the one I currently have on there. All right, so setup right here, optics. Currently, I have the EOTech on here. A lot of controversy around the EOTech. Watch my video on the EOTech if you have any questions about why I'm running it. But anyhow, there's a lot of other good optics out there if you're looking for like some type of a reflex sight. You can look at Vortex's Huey, their reflex sight, also the Aimpoint T2. And if you're looking for more budget optics, you have plenty that are out there. I have them on the table right here, but Holosun, Primary Arms, blah, blah, blah. So I prefer the EOTech though. Anyhow, I've got the EXPS 3-0. Now, people always ask me, absolute or lower 1/3. So what's that's referring to is the height of the optic. I prefer a higher optic. In fact, I prefer even higher than a 1/3 personally. But this is currently set at a lower 1/3. That means that absolute iron sights that are at the typical height that you have iron sights will be at the lower 1/3 of the window should I need to look through them. So that means the reticle is a little bit higher. What that does for me is when I aim through, I don't have to be buried quite as deep into the stock. That allows me to be more upright in my posture, allows me to, for me, shoot better. So that's why I prefer a lower 1/3. Anyhow, another question people ask me is why do I have the EOTech run so far forward? So there's a couple of reasons. First reason is I like it to be further forward. That way it doesn't obstruct my view quite as much as having it further back where it kind of looks bigger in the view. The second reason is because I run a magnifier, maybe about 20 or 40% of the time, pretty specific, 39.4. So I need that space there. And the magnifier that I am running is the G33 from EOTech. I've been a huge fan of it. I really like it. It works very well. No complaints. Anyhow, EOTech setup right here. I know it's a little pricey. There are cheaper options out there. And of course, there's 1 to 6s, 1 to 4s, all that kind of stuff. Figure out what optic's going to work for you. But on this particular rifle, I'm taking it out to maybe 250, maybe 300 on a good day. So it's definitely a shorter range setup. Let's hit the sling before we get too far in here. I got schooled by a ranger on sling setup, and we always learn something. But point is, I think I could definitely improve my sling setup. So I've been kind of working at that. One thing that he was a big proponent of was attaching right and left. So what that means is on my stock, I attach it to the opposite side of my shoulder. So I am, to the same side of the shoulder or opposite, depending on how you look at it. Okay, point is, I'm right-handed, stock's in my shoulder right here. I have the sling on the opposite side. That way, when I have it around, it's coming from around the opposite side of the stock over around my body, and then it's attaching to the same side of the rifle. What that allows me to do is when I switch sides, I always have a little bit of slack here, and that makes it easier, no matter how tight this is, to be able to switch it over. Now the question is why don't I have a single point sling setup if I'm so concerned about switching shoulders? With a single point setup, it's much more difficult to sling it on your body and that type of thing. And that brings me to my forward sling placement. So right here, I just have the CQD sling mount, just a good old standby. It's not the best sling mount. It's mounted via hook. I think QDs are better, but I had this on hand. That's what I'm using. As far as sling placement, I do think it's better to mount your sling up front. However, I always find that my hand gets caught, especially on a short-barreled rifle. So on a short-barreled rifle, I compromise and I move it a little bit further down. Sorry, Garrett. But it works. It's a little bit more difficult when you're slinging. You have to kind of do a little bit more guesswork with it. But point is that there are better options. Now with the hooks, they make a lot of noise. So I have this little hook silencer from Blue Force Gear. The sling I have is the Way of the Gun sling from Frank Proctor, of whom I'm a huge fan. He's a great guy. If you haven't checked him out, check him out. Former Green Beret, I want to say, or Special Forces in the Army. Good dude, great shooter. Anyhow, talked about sling setup. Let's talk about the rail now. So people always yell at me, hey, get rid of the quad rail, get rid of the quad rail. And yeah, I understand where they're coming from. There are some really strong rails out there nowadays that probably match with the Daniel Defenses, but the MK18 Mod 1 is kind of a little bit of nostalgia for all of us. Anyhow, the rail does present some problems because the barrel is so short. It's a 10.3-inch barrel, and that's about as short as you want to go with 5.56. you don't have a whole lot of hand space. Because of that, your setup up here is critical. So let's talk about it. I've gone back and forth on my setups quite a bit. Now, what changed my setup completely was the BE Myers Muzzle. So this little hunk of change right up here. Now, I do a lot of night vision shooting. And if you do any bit of night vision shooting, you can aim through the optic. The EXPS 3.0 does have a night vision capability, as does the T2 and blah, blah, blah. But you're primarily using some type of illuminator along with a laser, because especially in really dark areas, you need an illuminator of some kind. Anyhow, the Muzzle blows it out of the water. I have a video coming up on the Muzzle, so we'll talk about it more. But the point is the Muzzle rocks. It's a great piece of technology. And also what it does is it offsets the IR device so it's not directly on top. Now, I used to run a PEC, the PEC 15 or the PLC or whatever the hell you want to call it. And that took up a lot of room. But because the Muzzle offsets it, I have a lot more space here, and that allows me to grip a little bit further up on the gun. Now, I do want to say this. I used to be like utterly obsessed with getting as far up on the gun as I could. Like, I wanted to be like, all the way up on there. And yeah, I definitely do agree that getting further up on the gun controls it more, but I'm not so obsessive compulsive about it anymore, especially after talking with Lucas and a couple other guys. What matters is good grip, good stance, all that kind of thing. And forward gripping does help, but it's not such a big deal. But anyhow, the Muzzle does help me get a more forward grip compared to having like a PEC 15, which is a much fatter grip. This is much slimmer, allows me to get kind of a better handful of it. As we know, girthiness is just kind of hard to grip. Okay. Anyhow, moving back here. So my pressure switch. I've used a lot of different pressure switches in my time. Right here we've got the Surefire pressure switch, the Surefire dual pressure switch. I have other setups, but this is the TNVC working with Unity Tactical, and they made the TAPS, a tactical augmented pressure switch, something like that. It's programmable. Does that matter so much to me? Not so much, but it is kind of nice. You can program it so like one tap is momentary on, two taps is like constant on, or one tap turns on both the IR device and the light. That might be more important for guys who run a light that has a IR device on it. I can understand for some departments or some guys who are using laser devices that don't have an IR illuminator, that might be a big issue. But anyhow, the TAPS is pretty cool. What I like most about it, one of the main reasons I got it, is because it secures to the rail directly. That way it's not just kind of like folded onto there with molded rubber. It doesn't just kind of sit there. It's actually mounted into the rail. It can also mount to M-LOK and Key Mod. I'm a big fan of it. I've been testing it out for about the last month or so. So, I mean, I can't give you my final opinion yet, but so far, so good. Another thing to note here is I have a lot of wire, so you want to manage your wires. I know I can manage my wires better, but I just use a small zip tie just through the rail right there, and it secures my wires. That way they're not flying everywhere so much. Anyhow, light. So you might have looked at the light and been like, what the hell's going on there? That doesn't quite look like a Surefire. Well, we'll talk about that. So first off, this is a Surefire Mini 300 Scout, whatever you want to call it. Great light, doesn't put off a whole lot of lumens, but again, if you use like the M600 or something like that, the Scout light, those get pretty big and you don't have a whole lot of space then to go shoot with both hands and all that kind of thing. So I went with the M300. Now the problem is because the Muzzle was so close, the standard Surefire head wasn't working, so I switched it off for the Malkoff, which is actually an upgrade. I do really like the Malkoff head, and I think they did a great job with it. But anyhow, that allows it to have enough clearance so it's not pressing upwards on the Muzzle. Now, quick note here. The reason I have my pressure switch up here, now as you know in the older video, I had it like tucked between the PEC on the left side right here. And I could actuate with both hands, but it's much easier with the pressure pad just here on the top. That way when I switch, I don't have to really mess so much with like my hand placement, doing something different. It's the same hand placement, just opposite shoulder. So that makes my life a lot easier when I'm shooting ambidextrous. Now, how big of a deal is it to shoot ambidextrous? I don't know. I'm not you. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. Like everything, guys, figure out what works for you. All right, Muzzle. You have a and B button. They have different functions as far as specifically what they're doing, the type of flood, IR flood they're putting out, or a spotlight or something like that. But anyhow, two buttons are accessible there. So when I'm shooting under night vision, it's very easy to feel to change my settings, like how focused my beam is. Just this little switch right here, and it can go up to high power mode, switching back. Anyhow, really easy to use. We'll talk more about that later. But the Muzzle rocks. I'm a huge fan of it. It is a little pricey, but if you need that capability and you have latest Gen 3 plus, Gen 3 whatever, night vision, then it's definitely worth it. All right, here. So up at the front, I have a Daniel Defense fixed front sight. So a lot of people are like, why do you run a fixed front sight? So to reiterate, I've talked about it in other videos. I like that fixed front sight because it works as a kind of a reference point when I'm shooting really fast. So because it's in that lower 1/3 of the window, it allows me to find that dot if I ever have any trouble. I'm shooting like at a weird position under cars, all that type of stuff. And when I'm moving transition really quick between targets, it just kind of gives me a reference and all that blur of speed to make sure I'm kind of still have the rifle somewhat centered. All right, at the very end here of the rifle, we have a Surefire 3-prong. So why do I have this muzzle device? Well, I have a Surefire suppressor. Well, why aren't you using like the War Comp or the brake or something like that? So I'll tell you, first off, a brake is ridiculous on a short-barreled rifle. I never recommend them. I hate brakes overall, but on a short-barreled rifle, it is a total no-go unless you're like a huge asshole to your friends. As you can see, my Surefire 3-prong is pretty well shot. I think I have like 19K rounds on this particular 3-prong. There are 4 prongs out there. A lot of guys kind of really get into that clone game where they want to really just completely clone a rifle. And the 4 prongs are great. I do have them on a couple of rifles, but 3-prong works just as well. Don't get too wrapped up in those details, guys. If you're just a shooter, if you like shooting more than you like collecting, then the 3-prong will do you just fine. Having a 3-prong, it just directs the gas straight back, straight forward. That puts the rifle straight back in your shoulder. Easy to control the recoil. You don't need a brake. The Surefire War Comp. So I have this on my Gh3 build, which is currently undergoing some stuff right now. But the problem with the War Comp is that, now depending on how you time it, the point is you have some gases flying off in some direction. So depending on where you have your accessories, you might cook those accessories, and that's a problem. So I think that the War Comp works really well on, say, like a 14.5 or a 16-inch barrel, but I'm not so much of a fan of the War Comp on the short-barreled rifle, even though it does really well at keeping the weapon on target and all that good stuff. So again, figure out kind of where you have your accessories. If you're just running a gun slick, then you're probably not going to have a problem. But if you have anything up front, like a light, you're going to have to back that off, and then you don't have a whole lot of rail space. It becomes a problem. So because of that, I recommend the War Comp on a longer gun, not so much a really short-barreled rifle like the Gh3 build that I have right there. All right, final thing. If you notice, I have no vertical grip. Why do I have no vertical grip? Because I think in most of my videos, you see me run a vertical grip. Well, that kind of comes down to me I think maturing as a shooter a little bit. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong when it comes to vert grips, but I have found that running slick, I'm not as comfortable when I shoot compared to running like some type of vertical grip. Like this is the G. If you're running an M-Lock rail, you have the Magpul or you have the Samson engineering one. But I found that when I'm shooting without the vertical grip, that I tend to control my recoil better, my shots are better and all that kind of stuff. I think that comes down to kind of pointability. When I'm shooting without a vert grip, I'm typically going kind of the claw with finger forward. I'm sure you've seen that quite a bit, but that allows you kind of just to point at the target. So close range shooting, it works really well. Long range shooting, I don't really notice any difference between having a vert grip or not. But depending on your body mechanics, the vert grip might work pretty well. So when I have a vert grip on this, I typically run it about just forward of where the light placement is, like this right here. And that way, when I wrap around it, I have my thumb either on the light or up on the fire control on the muzzle. So anyhow, that is my Mark 18 setup. This video went for way longer than I wanted it to, but I really wanted to get down into this and explain everything. Hope this was helpful as far as explaining to you guys why I have my rifle set up the way I do. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment. If you think that my setup is really stupid and that yours is better, comment as well, but you're probably wrong. If you think Lucas is a thought, you're wrong, because Lucas is actually pretty cool. Anyhow, guys, appreciate everything you've done. If you don't know, We broke 100K, so I don't know what I'm doing with my hands. We're looking cool. That's all that matters.